December 8, 1941. Imperial Japanese Naval Headquarters, Tokyo. Admiral Nagano reviewed the latest assessments from Pearl Harbor with a sense of triumph. Reports indicated that 8 American battleships had been either heavily damaged or sunk, nearly 200 aircraft destroyed, and approximately 2,400 personnel killed. The Pacific Fleet of the United States appeared to be temporarily incapacitated. What Nagano, and indeed no officer within the Imperial Japanese Navy, could have anticipated was the imminent resurgence of long-neglected American reserve fleets. Ships that had sat idle for years, some in decrepit condition, were poised to underpin a naval expansion that would surpass all expectations. Within a span of just 2 years, American shipyards would achieve output levels previously thought physically unattainable by Japanese planners, launching vessels at a pace that far outstripped the Imperial Navy's ability to monitor or counter them. The reactivation of reserve fleets. Along the James River near Fort Eustis in Virginia, a major reserve anchorage contained vessels from the First World War, maintained in various degrees of decay. Exact figures are unclear, but the site likely held over 100 ships. During the 1930s, these vessels received only minimal upkeep as congressional funding for maintenance dwindled. They occupied a peculiar status, too valuable to dismantle, too costly to preserve correctly, and apparently too outdated to play any meaningful role in future conflicts. On the morning of December 8, 1941, this dormant fleet began to stir. Teams from Norfolk Naval Shipyard, alongside civilian contractors, arrived at the anchorage with a single remarkable directive: return as many ships as possible to operational service immediately. Early inspections revealed extensive deterioration. Engine rooms were waterlogged, critical machinery corroded beyond recognition, ventilation ducts clogged with birds' nests, and some decks were overtaken by vegetation. Yet despite these obstacles, crews managed to restore motion to many vessels within weeks. One of the first to rejoin active duty was the USS Bridgeport, a former German passenger liner seized during World War I, its smokestacks belching black smoke after more than a decade of dormancy. By the spring of 1942, numerous auxiliary ships, including repair vessels, tankers, cargo carriers, and transports, had been refurbished and returned to service. Though these ships were not front-line warships, their presence was vital. They provided crucial support and logistics at a time when every functional hull was needed to sustain American operations. Intelligence failures in Tokyo. Japanese assessments of U.S. naval capacity were hampered by limited intelligence resources. The size and effectiveness of the Imperial Navy's information network remain debated, but it is clear that analysts significantly underestimated America's industrial potential. They could not foresee how quickly and efficiently the United States would bring its reserve fleets back to life, a development that would dramatically shift the balance of naval power in the Pacific. Before the outbreak of hostilities, Japanese military analysts projected that the United States could potentially produce around 500,000 tons of naval vessels annually, along with up to 2 million tons of merchant shipping under conditions of maximum mobilization. Their assessment methods seemed methodical. They surveyed American shipyards, calculated domestic steel output, and evaluated the availability of labor. Reports from Japanese naval attachés stationed in Washington highlighted perceived inefficiencies, labor unrest, racial tensions, and a general complacency typical of peacetime. One such report pointed out that shipyards were functioning well below their theoretical capacity, and that workers were reluctant to commit to overtime. While these observations accurately reflected the pre-war environment, they gravely underestimated the United States' capacity to mobilize for war. Japanese analysts interpreted labor disputes as permanent obstacles, failing to anticipate that unions would agree to refrain from strikes for the duration of the conflict. They noted racial segregation without considering that wartime demands would open previously unavailable roles for minorities, even if limited. Suggestions from intelligence officers that American production capabilities could exceed expectations were often ignored. Strategic thinking at the time was dominated by the Kai-Kessin doctrine, which assumed the conflict would be resolved within a single decisive naval confrontation. Under this framework, the long-term industrial output of the United States was considered largely irrelevant, as the war was expected to conclude before newly built ships could influence the outcome. By 1943, these assumptions were proven catastrophically wrong. The United States had produced more than 19 million tons of shipping, nearly 10 times the figure Japanese planners had deemed possible. This failure was not merely an error of intelligence, it was a profound misjudgment of the American ability to mobilize society and industry on an unprecedented scale. Central to this transformation was the United States Maritime Commission, which pivoted almost overnight from its original New Deal mandate of managing a declining merchant fleet to becoming the engine of a massive wartime shipbuilding effort. Under the leadership of Admiral Emory S. Land, who possessed both technical knowledge and administrative skill, the Commission set a clear objective: produce ships faster than enemy forces could destroy them. Wartime authority allowed the Commission to seize control of shipyards, allocate critical resources, direct labor forces, and synchronize every aspect of production, creating a highly coordinated system invisible to foreign observers who were focused merely on counting existing ships. The Liberty Ship program, adapted from a British cargo vessel design, became the cornerstone of this mass production strategy. The ships were deliberately simplified, relying on older, proven technology, reciprocating engines instead of modern turbines, and straight, uncomplicated hull lines instead of intricate curves, so that relatively inexperienced workers could assemble them rapidly. The first Liberty ship, the SS Patrick Henry, took 244 days to complete, launching on September 27, 1941. By early 1942, the construction timeline had dropped below 100 days, and by the end of that year, some shipyards were completing vessels in less than 50 days. The improvement curve was both steep and continuous, reflecting a system that learned and adapted with remarkable speed. Equally important was the human dimension. The Commission implemented intensive training programs that could convert farmers into competent sailors within weeks. The Merchant Mariner Academy condensed its curriculum from 4 years to just 18 months. By the end of the war, over 250,000 merchant mariners had been trained, effectively creating from scratch a workforce exceeding the size of Japan's entire maritime personnel. This combination of industrial scale, organizational ingenuity, and human resource development exemplified the United States' extraordinary wartime mobilization, a capacity that had been fundamentally underestimated by its adversaries. The Kaiser Revolution in shipbuilding. Henry J. Kaiser, though entirely new to the maritime industry, brought transformative ideas from his experience in large-scale construction projects like dam building. His methodology was straightforward yet revolutionary. Deconstruct intricate processes into manageable components, execute multiple operations simultaneously, and prioritize investment in the workforce. At his Richmond, California shipyards, which ultimately comprised 4 interconnected sites and 55 slipways, Kaiser pioneered assembly line production for ships. Unlike conventional shipyards where vessels were built sequentially from the keel upward, Kaiser's method involved constructing different sections concurrently. Bow modules were assembled at one location while stern modules were fabricated elsewhere. Entire deck houses, complete with fittings and equipment, were prepared off-site and later hoisted into position. Kaiser's approach to labor was equally innovative. When experienced shipbuilders were in short supply, he did not compromise on quality. Instead, he reimagined the training process. Workers were taught highly specialized skills rather than the entire craft of shipbuilding. A welder, for instance, might focus on mastering a single type of joint, but would execute it with flawless consistency hundreds or even thousands of times. To prevent production bottlenecks, Kaiser developed extensive support systems. Facing a shortage of worker housing, he constructed entire residential communities. Recognizing the need for healthcare, he established what would become the Kaiser Permanente network. For childcare challenges, he implemented round-the-clock nurseries. Every potential barrier to efficient production was systematically addressed. By the middle of 1942, Kaiser shipyards were completing Liberty ships at unprecedented rates. While individual record-setting construction times are often debated, the overall sustained pace of output was undeniable. The Richmond facilities alone produced more than 700 vessels throughout the course of World War II. The strategic implications of Pearl Harbor. The Japanese assault on Pearl Harbor, while achieving tactical success, contained significant strategic miscalculations. Admiral Isoroku Yamamoto, the architect of the attack, had a deeper understanding of American industrial strength than many of his contemporaries. Having studied at Harvard and spent time in Washington, he had first-hand insight into the nation's manufacturing capabilities. The oft-cited notion that he awoke a sleeping giant is likely apocryphal, but his recognition of the United States' latent potential influenced his planning. Although the attack initially appeared to validate Japanese strategy, several critical targets were overlooked. Most notably, the Pacific Fleet's aircraft carriers were absent at the time, and vital infrastructure, including repair docks, fuel depots, and submarine bases, remained largely intact. These facilities allowed the U.S. Navy to recover rapidly. More importantly, the attack instantly unified American public opinion. Prior to Pearl Harbor, the United States was deeply divided and inclined towards isolationism. The assault galvanized the nation. Laborers worked extended hours, unions suspended strikes, and unprecedented numbers of women joined the industrial workforce. The surge in American production. The impact of this mobilization became evident in the statistics of ship production. Shipyards increased output month after month throughout 1942, not only due to new facilities coming online, but also because existing yards were operating with greater efficiency, workers were gaining skill, and production systems were becoming more refined. By mid-1942, the pace of Liberty ship construction surpassed expectations once deemed impossible by Japanese strategists. Monthly completions rose sharply. 5 ships were finished in January, 14 by March, 33 in June, and 67 by September. This rapid escalation reflected not merely the expansion of shipyard capacity, but also a comprehensive transformation in American industrial organization, labor specialization, and logistical coordination. The combined effect of Kaiser's innovations and the nation's wartime mobilization reshaped the United States' ability to project power across the oceans and sustain prolonged conflict. The apex of Liberty ship production occurred in October 1943, when American shipyards completed 106 vessels in a single month, averaging more than 3 ships each day. The scale of this output baffled Japanese intelligence, which struggled to reconcile these figures with reports from neutral observers of hundreds of newly constructed American ships appearing in Atlantic ports. Japanese analysts proposed a variety of explanations. Perhaps the Americans were double-counting vessels, including ships built for the Great Lakes, or perhaps the figures were simply fabricated. Accepting the stark reality that the United States could sustain such industrial output seemed implausible. Each Liberty ship was the product of immense logistical orchestration. Vast quantities of steel had to be delivered in strict sequence, engines manufactured by multiple companies had to arrive on schedule, and components from hundreds of suppliers were funneled seamlessly to the construction sites. The organizational precision required to synchronize all these elements was as remarkable as the ships themselves. In addition to new construction, the reactivation of reserve fleet vessels provided critical support. Repair ships could service damaged ships close to operational zones, reducing the need for lengthy trips back to dry docks. Tankers extended the operational reach of the fleet, while ammunition ships, despite the inherent dangers of their cargo, ensured a continuous supply of ordnance to sustain American firepower. The perspective of Japanese submariners offers a direct glimpse into the dramatic expansion of U.S. naval capabilities. Reports from submarine commanders, often dismissed as exaggerations by their superiors, chronicled the gradual transformation of American maritime power. Commander Kinashi Takazu of the I-19 submarine achieved notable success in September 1942 by sinking the carrier USS Wasp. Yet, subsequent patrols revealed increasingly formidable obstacles: larger and more tightly defended convoys, persistent air patrols, and dense escort formations. By late 1943, engaging American shipping had become nearly suicidal. The rapid evolution of American anti-submarine warfare, fueled by industrial capacity, reshaped the Pacific theater. Escort carriers, many converted from commercial hulls, provided air cover far from established bases, while hundreds of newly produced destroyer escorts hunted submarines relentlessly. Technological improvements in radar and sonar further amplified their effectiveness. By late 1943, Japanese submarines had largely shifted from offensive strikes to logistical missions, delivering supplies to isolated garrisons. The hunters had become the hunted, maneuvering primarily to avoid detection rather than to seek targets. One officer wryly observed that American production seemed capable of generating a destroyer for every ton of rice in Japan. The shipbuilding ecosystem, exemplified by the Kaiser yards, demonstrated the pinnacle of American industrial methodology. The Richmond shipyard complex operated continuously with rotating day and night shifts, maintaining uninterrupted production. Prefabrication methods had reached extraordinary levels of refinement. Major sections of ships were constructed in separate facilities. Bow sections weighing over 200 tons were assembled as complete units. Stern sections incorporated propeller shafts during fabrication, and deckhouses arrived with full plumbing and electrical systems already installed. These modules were then fitted together on the slipways like massive three-dimensional puzzles. The workforce itself reflected a profound social shift. Women accounted for 25 to 30% of the labor force in some yards, while minorities filled roles previously denied to them. Though discrimination and restricted opportunities persisted, the demands of war had opened industrial employment on an unprecedented scale. Most workers had less than a year of experience, yet overall productivity surpassed pre-war standards. The supporting infrastructure was equally extraordinary. Miles of railway transported materials efficiently. Massive cranes, some specially engineered to lift weights previously considered impossible, positioned ship sections with precision, and machine shops, foundries, and assembly areas operated in tightly coordinated sequences. Within Japanese leadership, recognition of inevitable defeat emerged gradually. Initial confidence following early victories gave way to creeping doubt, which ultimately transformed into the stark acknowledgement that the industrial and logistical power of the United States made sustained Japanese resistance mathematically impossible. The defeat of Japanese forces in the Marianas Islands in June 1944 marked a decisive shift in the Pacific conflict. During the Battle of the Philippine Sea, American pilots referred to the engagement as the Great Marianas Turkey Shoot, reflecting the one-sided nature of the combat. The U.S. Task Force 58 deployed a fleet that included more aircraft carriers, battleships, and escort vessels than Japan had possessed prior to the war. Japanese naval aviation suffered catastrophic losses, with over 400 aircraft destroyed, while inflicting minimal damage on the Americans, downing fewer than 30 planes. In the aftermath, Admiral Soemu Toyoda, who commanded the Imperial Japanese Navy's combined fleet, acknowledged that the loss at the Marianas signaled an inevitable defeat. The United States had effectively constructed a naval force beyond Japan's capacity to counter, supported by merchant fleets that Japan could not disrupt, and underpinned by industrial production far exceeding Japanese capabilities. By late 1944, the arrival of B-29 bombers over Japanese cities, operating from bases in the Marianas, made this technological and industrial advantage apparent to the civilian population. While Japanese fighters could reach the altitudes at which B-29s operated, interceptions were rarely successful, leaving the American bombers largely unchallenged. Each B-29 represented the scale and sophistication of American industry. Costly, complex machines produced in large numbers, a testament to the U.S. industrial mobilization. The evolution of cargo shipping mirrored this industrial ingenuity. The Liberty ships, built rapidly to support the war effort, were soon followed by the Victory class, which addressed the limitations of the earlier vessels while retaining the benefits of mass production. Victory ships were faster, more robust, and more efficient. One critical improvement was speed. Liberty ships, capable of only 11 knots, were vulnerable to submarine attacks, whereas Victory ships could travel at 15 to 17 knots, outpacing most surfaced submarines and shortening delivery times significantly. Structural refinements in hull design eliminated weaknesses that had caused some Liberty ships to crack during voyages. The transition from Liberty to Victory ship production demonstrated remarkable adaptability in American shipyards. Construction lines shifted to the new design without major interruptions, and workers quickly mastered new techniques without sacrificing productivity. By the middle of 1944, Victory ships were rolling off the yards at rates comparable to the earlier Liberty ships. Over 500 Victory ships were ultimately produced, many of which remained in service long after the war ended, proving that large-scale production did not inherently compromise quality when managed effectively. This industrial surge also drove profound social changes. Shipyards became sites of opportunity for women, who performed roles previously deemed beyond their capacity, including welding, riveting, and operating heavy machinery. African Americans also gained access to skilled positions, though discriminatory barriers remained. Kaiser's shipyards introduced innovations beyond the assembly lines. Health programs ensured workers remained fit and capable, while child care centers, operating around the clock, allowed parents to work flexible shifts. Massive housing projects, such as Vanport City near Portland, provided immediate accommodation for tens of thousands, effectively creating new urban communities in weeks. These initiatives were not acts of charity, they were deliberate investments in workforce efficiency. Workers who were healthy, well-fed, and supported by nearby housing and childcare could operate at maximum productivity. As experience accumulated and systems improved, the labor required to construct a ship decreased dramatically. By late 1944, building a Liberty ship demanded roughly one-third of the man-hours required in early 1942. This reduction reflected not only efficiency gains, but a transformation in how industrial labor was organized and executed. By 1945, the scale of American production and logistical support made the outcome of the war a mathematical certainty. The combination of overwhelming naval power, technological advantage, industrial output, and a highly mobilized workforce ensured that Japan could no longer compete on any strategic front, sealing the inevitable course of defeat. The Philippine campaign highlighted the United States' capacity to deploy immense military power across the Pacific with unprecedented efficiency. Invasion forces consisted of hundreds of ships, accompanied by vast logistical networks that spanned the ocean. At Eniwatok, the concentration of American firepower surpassed any comparable engagement in recorded military history. Preliminary bombardments used more ordnance than many nations could supply in total, reflecting the overwhelming material advantage the U.S. maintained. By the time of the Okinawa operation, the assembled fleet exceeded 1,400 vessels, likely marking the largest naval assembly ever witnessed. Japan's kamikaze attacks, while achieving occasional tactical victories, failed to influence the overall course of the conflict. Numerous ships were destroyed and hundreds more sustained damage, losses that might have halted other nations' operations entirely. For the United States, however, such attrition was easily absorbed. Industrial capacity allowed rapid repair of damaged vessels and replacement of lost ones, ensuring operations continued uninterrupted. By mid-1945, American naval forces operated with a level of abundance that would have seemed almost fantastical just 4 years earlier. The scale of shipbuilding and resource allocation had reached a point where attritional losses could no longer affect strategic outcomes. Victory in this sense had become a matter of arithmetic, rooted in industrial output rather than battlefield tactics. Although the atomic bombings of Hiroshima and Nagasaki are often highlighted as decisive, the underlying reality was that Japan had already been rendered incapable of sustaining effective resistance. The conventional war, waged through massive industrial production and logistics, had already sealed the outcome. The atomic attacks accelerated surrender, but the decisive factor had been American shipyards, which had produced an unparalleled volume of ships and war materiel. Between December 1941 and August 1945, U.S. shipyards launched over 5,000 merchant ships, totaling more than 50 million deadweight tons. Japan, by contrast, could produce only a small fraction of this amount. In many months, American yards delivered more vessels than Japan could complete in an entire year. The disparity went beyond raw numbers. U.S. shipbuilding continuously integrated design improvements, innovations, and quality control measures. Ships were not just numerous, they were progressively more capable. This combination of quantity, enhanced quality, and iterative improvement created an advantage that Japan could not counter. Admiral Ernest King's maritime strategy emphasized this reality. American forces could replace ships faster than the Japanese could destroy them, and crews could be trained more rapidly than Japan could inflict casualties. In essence, industrial production became a decisive weapon, a force multiplier that determined the outcome without reliance on conventional battle results alone. Post-war interrogations of Japanese officers revealed a gradual, sobering acknowledgement of the war's inevitability. Initial victories had lent confidence to Japanese strategy, but successive defeats demonstrated the widening imbalance. One senior officer described the sequence with stark clarity. After Midway, Japan had lost the initiative. Following Guadalcanal, momentum slipped away. The Marianas Campaign marked the effective loss of the war. The Philippines confirmed the end was approaching, and Okinawa made surrender a desperate hope rather than a distant prospect. The civilian population's understanding of the situation lagged behind military recognition, though it eventually aligned with reality. Government propaganda continued to proclaim victories even as urban centers were devastated, yet relentless B-29 bombings, naval artillery, and the submarine blockade revealed the true scale of Japanese vulnerability. By the spring of 1945, a majority of Japanese civilians and officers privately acknowledged defeat, though fear or denial prevented them from speaking openly. This refusal to confront the strategic reality resulted in hundreds of thousands of avoidable deaths. The atomic bombings, while historically dramatic, functioned largely as a formal mechanism to justify surrender, providing Japan with a face-saving conclusion to a conflict already determined by industrial and logistical supremacy. The post-war reactivation of reserve fleets and subsequent shipbuilding programs underscored the enduring strategic lessons of American production capability. The ability to generate, sustain, and continuously improve vast military forces demonstrated that industrial power could surpass conventional tactical considerations, fundamentally reshaping the understanding of modern warfare. The Philippine campaign and subsequent operations exemplified how logistics, production, and strategic arithmetic could alone determine victory, making clear that the decisive battles were not fought solely on the seas or in the skies, but in the shipyards and factories that fueled them. In nations governed by democratic principles, the potential for large-scale mobilization often surpasses what even the most meticulous authoritarian regimes anticipate. Techniques honed during these mobilizations, standardized production, modular construction, and a highly specialized labor force left a lasting imprint on industrial practices worldwide. The societal consequences were equally profound. Women entering factory work in unprecedented numbers, minorities assuming skilled positions once closed to them, and employers introducing comprehensive healthcare systems all contributed to permanent transformations within American society. Japan's intelligence shortcomings during the early stages of World War II were not primarily due to a lack of information, but rather the inability to interpret it accurately. Deeply ingrained cultural assumptions and rigid strategic doctrines acted as cognitive filters, preventing Japanese analysts from grasping the full scope of American industrial capacity. Ships were visible, yet their potential for large-scale transformation remained unimaginable. Tactical maneuvers were well understood, but the complexities of logistics eluded them.
The contrast in preparation was striking. Japan relied on highly skilled crews, advanced tactical knowledge, and a determined spirit. The United States, by contrast, leveraged massive industrial output, sophisticated organizational structures, and the sheer certainty of numbers. In contemporary industrialized warfare, the ability to produce, supply, and sustain operations outweighed individual courage, while logistics dictated success more than battlefield strategy. The reactivation of America's reserve fleet illustrates this principle vividly. Ships that had been mothballed before the war were brought back into service in 1941, marking the beginning of a dramatic industrial expansion that would redefine global power. Victory was not achieved through singular, spectacular naval engagements alone, but through the sustained output of shipyards, steel mills, and training facilities dispersed across the country. Japan's miscalculation stemmed from a failure to comprehend this underlying societal strength. They interpreted peacetime inefficiency as a permanent limitation and underestimated the nation's capacity to pivot toward wartime production. Industrial pioneers such as Henry Kaiser exemplified this transformation. Their innovations extended beyond shipbuilding, introducing methods that would revolutionize manufacturing practices worldwide. Simultaneously, the social changes they catalyzed reshaped the American workforce, while their organizational strategies laid the groundwork for modern logistics. The human experience of this mobilization encompassed both remarkable achievements and profound costs. American workers accomplished feats that defied prior expectations, while Japanese personnel fought with courage in the face of overwhelming numerical and logistical disadvantage. Civilians, too, endured the hardships of war, yet the outcome was dictated far more by industrial power than individual heroism. The implications of these lessons endure. Military strength remains fundamentally rooted in production capability, and the strategic options available to a nation are still determined by its industrial foundation. Democratic societies, despite apparent inefficiencies in peacetime, retain a latent potential for rapid, large-scale mobilization that can surprise even the most astute observers. The vessels of the reserve fleet returning to active duty in 1941 symbolized more than a tactical augmentation. They demonstrated that an industrial democracy could transform itself from complacency into dominance with unprecedented speed. Across American shipyards, workers did more than construct ships. They contributed to a profound reordering of global power, one hull at a time. The underlying logic of the conflict was straightforward. The United States possessed the industrial capacity to construct ships at a pace far exceeding Japan's ability to destroy them. It could train sailors and crews more rapidly than the enemy could eliminate them, and it could supply its forces faster than Japan could disrupt the flow. This was not merely a path to victory. It represented a fundamental shift in the nature of warfare. The era of singular, decisive engagements had passed. In its place, large-scale, industrialized war had emerged as the defining form of conflict. Japan experienced this transformation painfully and with irreversible consequences. The empire that in December 1941 had appeared unassailable found itself dismantled and shattered by August 1945. Its defeat was not the result of superior strategy or extraordinary valor, but of the overwhelming productive power of its opponent. The fleets assembled in American ports acted as catalysts for a massive industrial surge, turning the Pacific War from a contested struggle into a statistical inevitability. The calculation was simple. Sheer output and logistical capacity determined the outcome more than battlefield heroics. Ironically, the very industrial principles that contributed to Japan's collapse would later underpin its post-war recovery. Japanese shipyards would adopt mass production techniques pioneered in the United States, and the nation's broader economy would harness the efficiencies of large-scale manufacturing. In this sense, the lessons of total war helped transform Japan from a militarized empire into a thriving economic powerhouse. The same machinery and organizational practices that had devastated the country in war became tools of reconstruction and peace. Ultimately, the story of the American reserve fleets illustrates a broader truth about modern conflict. When a nation mobilizes its industrial capacity in alignment with national determination, when production itself becomes a weapon, traditional metrics of military strength, numbers of troops, tactical brilliance, or courage in battle lose their centrality. The ships brought from reserve status in 1941 did more than provide material support. They demonstrated that in the industrial age, victory is often determined before combat begins. The factory floor assumes the strategic importance of the battlefield. Assembly lines rival the front lines in significance, and the arithmetic of production becomes the ultimate measure of success.